Welcome back. We are Gentlemen United and you are in the Man Cave. The show topic today is show up, produce, and die on time. Now, this is a sarcastic phrase used to encapsulate the concept of male disposability, which is a topic that most are still unfamiliar with. What is it? Does it exist? Is it the product of toxic masculinity and the patriarchy? So McCall Jones is a researcher, writer, public speaker, and coach. His more than 15 years in advertising helped him understand that the power of communication has helped corporations make billions of dollars, is equally as available to every individual on the planet. He is the founder of the Institute for Adult Communication, an organization dedicated to researching how people use language to navigate their lives, how the use of language differs from person to person, and he looks at how people have vastly different results in their lives based on how they speak. A large portion of his research and training is focused on specific differences in how most men and most women communicate their needs and desires. He's created training programs dedicated to specific breakdowns in how people speak, and as a result has helped people make more money, have more satisfying relationships, and achieve more overall confidence and effectiveness in their lives. McCall has led his programs around the world and now has begun a multi-year examination of what exactly masculinity is, the state of masculinity in Western society, and identifying what he can do to help address the state of men and begin to rebuild how men think about and manage themselves and identify man's true role in his own life, society, and the world. Trigger warning. If discussing topics like male disposability is going to offend you, I'll pause for a moment and invite you to stop watching right now and go on to the next YouTube clip. This will likely be too much for some to handle. As always, for those watching this live broadcast on YouTube, feel free to add your comments and questions in the comment bar. I'll watch for them and we'll get to them time permitting. Joining me tonight all the way from California is McCall Jones and of course you, our viewers. I'm Sean Best. McCall, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean, so much for having me. Good to be here.
Tell us a bit about the Institute for Adult Communication. Now, who is your target audience and what your interaction with your clients looks like? Is it an audience, a group of people in the room? Is it one-on-one? Is it a webinar? Is it a combination of them? Like, what exactly is the Institute for Adult Communication and what does it look like when you're, servicing your clients?
All right, in practice. It started off with basically the target audience being myself. I had this dream of basically having this think tank and the ability to train other people. I had stumbled across this topic as a topic in terms of how men and women interact with each other, how men and women individually think of themselves, and I'd been taking lots of other programs that each offered tremendously valuable insights and tremendously valuable coaching, but they still weren't tying it all together. And I would randomly speak to people and they would constantly, like on a regular basis, multiple people in multiple countries really comment on how I had synthesized this information in ways that they had never actually heard before. And over time, I thought they were just blowing smoke. I mean, I was hearing hundreds and hundreds of different speakers, and I was seeing dozens of them and meeting, and some of them became my mentors and my own personal coaches. And I started to take seriously that maybe I do have a different take on this. Maybe there is something that's unique in the way that I see how these relationships go and how communication goes. And maybe I can step up and be some kind of contribution. And I didn't want to just be, McCall Jones public speaker. I said, I really want this to live beyond myself if it has a chance to do that. So I decided to start an organization and named it the Institute for Adult Communication because I really think that there's a distinction between the way that children communicate and the way that adults communicate in terms of effectiveness and what results as a result of those communications. So I put that together, and I wanted to also do a tremendous amount of my own research and writing because I just had this voracious appetite for this information. I never knew what it would become. It starts off as one of those fluke situations where it's like, this is really interesting. I'll read this one book I just found. And literally, I read the book, and 4 years later, I'm still just as voraciously sucking down all this information as I did 4 years prior, and now it's 17 years later.
Wow!
So it's been quite a journey. It started in Germany, and I brought it back with me here, and it's just been an amazing journey. And I'm thankful for the radio shows, and I teach part of my programs in a university in Taipei. So this will coming up in April will be my 5th year going to teach my program there, and the students are very open and very willing to listen, and it makes a huge difference for them. And I'm excited. I love to travel, and I get to go back, and that's always a very happy thing. But I think most important is the realization that I'm actually helping people and I'm really making a difference. And sometimes that making the difference is hard. I mean, it's a very interesting time right now in our societies, specifically Western society, in terms of people's opinions about themselves, about society, about men and women. And I started off with what works versus what doesn't work. And I found that much of the conversation that's going on in the popular culture simply doesn't work. And we're being forced to accept it. We are living and experiencing the consequences of accepting a conversation that doesn't work. And unfortunately, I'm observing that everyone's suffering. Everyone's debilitated. Everyone's suffering. Everyone's less than they otherwise could be. And we can spend the next 2-3 hours on the distinct and specific consequences of this broken conversation. But we're here today to talk about what that looks like specifically for men.
Yes, and when I started doing this sort of research you're talking about, not quite the same topics, but just on the relationship between men and women, it's like one of those things when you pull a thread in a sweater and you keep pulling it and there's just more. It seems like it's an endless thread.
Yep.
And the colors change. Like, oh, this is blue, now this is green, and and it's one of those things where once you start, like you said, sucking out that information, it becomes one of those things where you have just a voracious appetite for it. The more you learn, the more you want to learn. So
yeah.
I can totally relate to that. So McCall, the topic of the show is show up, produce, and die on time. Very intriguing title. So for those who don't understand what this means, can you take a minute and elaborate what that means to you? What does that phrase mean to you?
Sure. You mentioned it was sarcastic, going into the top of the show, and I just want to sort of pause and let you know that there's nothing about it that I found to be sarcastic. And the fact that you read the dynamic of male disposability into it is quite important. I was looking at what matters because, as I'm sure most of your listeners know, there's this huge conversation going on about the quote unquote changing role of masculinity and the state of masculinity and masculinity in crisis. And of course, the favorite word of toxic masculinity. And I started to look at that, very, very seriously. And I said, well, what is the role of men? What was the role? I mean, I'm 53 right now. So what was the role of men when I was younger versus what's the role of men now? What was the role in my father's generation? What was the role of men in my grandfather's generation? And looking back, and now, even with this sort of equality happening, women I see in popular culture are still demanding that men pay for first dates, and that men get out there and stand up and be tough and be strong. When 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the conversation was about men need to be more sensitive and men need to be more willing to share their emotions. And I observed that really wasn't working. Women weren't happy when men do that by and large, even though people, encourage men to be more sensitive and share more. When I actually did it was the worst possible thing I could have done. The look at a woman's eyes when she loses respect for you is probably the most devastating thing I've ever gotten to observe, and it was the direct result of.
You can't ever get it back once it's gone.
And you cannot get it back, and it's not part of the conversation. So what I began to recognize was not only are these 3 steps in line with masculine instincts, they're also in line with feminine instinct as well. So in other words, I couldn't see any difference between a man applying it and a woman being a consumer of it, and having them disagree on any one of those 3 points. Now, the first point is to show up. And if you actually listen to a lot of these popular conversations, especially the complaints that a lot of women have right now, is they say that men don't show up. So I took that to heart and I said, okay, what does that really look like and what's really going on here? Well, Woody Allen, is famous for his phrase that 97% of success is showing up. So in a lot of ways, I can credit that first step with the clarity for myself to Woody Allen for basically knowing. I mean, it's remarkably simple, but he's absolutely right. 97% of success is showing up. Now, he's currently in sort of politically correct or incorrect social hot water right now, but it doesn't make his statement any less correct. So I took a look at that. And what does that mean? It means that we have to prepare. It means that we have to study. It means that we have to commit ourselves. It means that we have to dive into whatever endeavor. If we're engineers, or if we're air conditioning technicians, if we are janitors, if we are pilots, no matter what we're doing, if we're radio show hosts, that our job is to become an expert in whatever we're doing to the maximum of our ability, so that we can apply those skills and apply that experience to the world.
If you enjoyed the show and want to see more, join our Facebook page called Man Cave by Gentlemen United. All of our shows, tons of additional content, and invitations to future shows are posted there. You can add to the conversation and suggest future discussion topics. Please like, comment, share, and most of all, subscribe by clicking the Gentlemen United icon. I promise it's free. Thanks again for joining us in The Man Cave.
Enjoyed the show? Like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for joining us in The Man Cave.